Unspotted Reviews, and today I'm sad to report that I'm going to be talking about a movie that was just apocalyptically awful. The 2022 film Cold Wind Blowing. This was the feature-length debut of writer-director Dion Copeland and is available to watch if anybody somehow chooses to or wants to on Tubi TV, at least in the US, for free with ads. So this basically follows a group of friends who shirk off the traditional family getting together for Christmas kind of thing to spend time with each other instead in a remote cabin out in the snowy countryside when bad things happen. That's pretty much it. There's really not a lot more to it than that. Now, a lot of people, when they hear me talk about a movie that is just awful, they're also wondering if this is a so bad it's good situation. And unfortunately, it really isn't in this case. This was just bad. There's no self-awareness. There's no sleaze. There's no anything along those lines that kind of bring it up to that Helen Keller versus Night Wolves good, bad quality. This was just terrible all the way through. So first of all, this was a film that runs about an hour and 48 minutes long, 108 minutes. And for any horror aspect of this film in which any characters knew they were in any sort of danger that kicked anything off was 53 minutes into the movie. The entire first half was nothing more than these characters getting together, spending time in this cabin, and having some sort of storyline development of interpersonal relationships. And all of that was awful. Everybody in this was unbelievable and absolutely terrible. The conversations would just be completely unhinged that they would have with one another. Everybody was just completely going from 0 to 10, back to 0, back to 10, all over the place where they were having good conversation, drinking, laughing, and then somebody would say something and everybody would be furious. And then 5 seconds later, everybody would be getting back together and having a meal and laughing again. And then somebody would say something and everybody would be furious. And it was just all over the board. None of it was believable. None of the characters actually worked. And for all of that to be happening in the entire first half of the movie really just made it nothing more than boring. There was a complete sense of interpersonal societal disconnect that was happening amongst everybody. For instance, the two main characters were a brother and sister whose parents were going through a bit of a, they were managing a divorce and so forth. So they just didn't want to deal with it. So that's one of the reasons that they decided to go up in the cabin and just spend time with each other instead of dealing with all the family BS. Okay, fine. That makes sense. We got a good storyline kicking off there. Not a problem. The brother goes ahead and invites the sister's very recent breakup ex along for the trip. Why? I have no fucking idea. Does he inform her of this? Nope. He just invites her ex, and that's the thing. We're kicking off with the drama for no reason. None of the interpersonal drama of this felt earned, and all of it felt awkward and just completely unbelievable. And the fact that it did dominate the entirety of the movie was just bizarre. So yeah, in terms of tempers flaring, yeah, it kind of made sense because we had this really, really toxic stew that was brewing. But why anybody put those toxic ingredients in there in the first place remains to be seen. It defies all logic. And for spending that amount of time on character development, I couldn't tell you the first thing about any of their actual characters. Nobody had a distinct personality or set of distinguishing features that allows me to, properly describe any of them in any kind of differential sense from the others. Everybody was just completely generic young person. That's it. And then once the horror elements did kick on, it was nothing more than just generic slasher, somewhat supernatural, home invasion type thing that never really went anywhere either. There was an element of amateurish camera work involved here that is not necessarily a bad thing. This wasn't terrible in terms of cinematography, camera angles, anything along those lines. What it was more than anything else was just a bit green, kind of inexperienced, if you will. Some of the lighting and angles and so forth just weren't really that polished. But for an indie film, very excusable. It wasn't terrible, like I said. But then when we do get down to the parts of the horror elements, somebody's under attack, something like that, that's where everything really does fall down, because there's this frenzied atmosphere to it where there's a lot of quick cuts and so forth, which makes sense. You want the camera to invoke the emotions in the audience. So yeah, if there's a frenzied situation, frenzied camera work can certainly be a good way to go. But there is an art form to it, because you not only need that frenzied camera work, but you also need it to be just coherent enough to actually know what's happening on screen. Whereas in this, there was an attack and the camera was all over the place and there was no coherency to it. All I knew was that something was happening that was bad in this flurry of blurred whatevers. Look, there's 3 major reasons why I'm actually angry at this movie. First of all, there is one thing that a movie should never, ever, ever be. It can be sleazy, it can be schlocky, it can be so bad it's good, that's all fine. But the one thing it should never, ever, ever be is boring. You can have a movie that really slows down the pace and has very methodical and purposeful timing, but hopefully it's done the legwork and the character development enough to earn that quiet moment and allow it to speak volumes in its little whisper. This is not the case with A Cold Wind Blows. It was just boring because nothing of interest was happening with characters I couldn't give 2 shits about. Reason number 2 is there was a sense of almost, I hate to say that there was a sense of pretentiousness about this, but there kind of was. And maybe I'm just picking up on things that weren't there. And if that's the case, then I do apologize. Then I am off base here. But there were a few things about this that just kind of screamed that it thought it was so much better than it was. First of all, the subtitle below the title on the poster says a Dion Copeland film. Nothing inherently wrong with that, but it does kind of speak to, if it's a so-and-so film, that's usually something that's kind of reserved for a little bit more prestige, a little bit more of earning it, but that's not something I'm going to hold against it. What really drove that kind of feeling I had in myself home was I just said that none of the horror elements started until the 53-minute mark. And although this movie did have opening credits in the first portion of it where it was listing actors' names, it didn't actually give the title of the film in a title card until after that moment, halfway through the movie, Cold Wind Blowing. Something about that just really rubbed me the wrong way. It kind of screams that the entire first half of the movie was nothing more than that kind of layup for things, and for it to be that ineffective just did not earn it. A late title card does have a little bit of a message to the audience, which is basically, okay, we've shown you what this movie can be. Now we're going to show you what it is actually going to be. One of the best examples I can think of this was the 2013 Fede Alvarez version of Evil Dead. You had the whole sequence that was taking place in the basement. You had the absolute terrifying, manic, fire ablaze, shotgun to the face kind of things where it was this whole sequence that had nothing to do with the rest of the movie, but it set the tone.
Let's set the fucking tone!
It set it for, this is the roller coaster ride you are going to wind up getting, and then at the absolute peak pinnacle of that moment, boom, title card. And then we had the quiet moments of the actual movie then proceeding from there, where we get introduced to the actual characters. So what Cold Wind Blowing did with the late title card for me was say, that entire first half that you absolutely detested, that's the movie that we're promising for you now in this second half, which just proved to be the same ineffective aspect, but now with horror. And the third thing that upset me about this movie is I am a horror film lover. It's why I devoted myself to this channel. I like to think that I set myself apart from other more generic critics in not necessarily an apologetic aspect of the genre. I try to give a very clear, analytical, subjective viewpoint that is firm but fair. But I also do love horror, and I try to bring that love into my reviews. So it may not be entirely apologetic, but it does take into account what the genre is trying to be and not holding that against the film, which unfortunately I think a lot of other critics do for horror movies. This is a film that I can't help but feel is everything that critics of horror complain about. This is nothing more than generic characters going out into a generic location that's isolated for absolutely no reason, only to be meeting with generic danger. There's nothing of any kind of redeemable storyline to this. Friday the 13th, any of those movies, even the ones that I really didn't care for so much, I can find storyline tidbits and character motivations and so forth that I do enjoy about them, and I can find redeeming qualities. But every complaint that I've heard about horror, and more specifically the slasher subgenre of horror, this film fits the bill for to a T. And I don't like that those critics' complaints are given any kind of legitimacy by movies such as this actually existing. So, it may go without saying that no, I don't really recommend Cold Wind Blowing. Yeah, it's available to watch for free. It's available on Tubi TV. It's a Christmas horror movie. If you've already worn through, the 183 and you're looking for the 184th Christmas horror movie out there, fine. That's a circumstance in which to kick it on if you're feeling really kind of masochistic about things. But I'm not feeling sadistic, so I'm not going to recommend it. So that's about it. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you in my next review, which hopefully will be better. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.